Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Chris Kuehl. I work for Dayton Children's Hospital, and I'm the Cybersecurity SIG chair for the new Cybersecurity SIG launching later or earlier in FY21. I'd like to take a minute to recognize our sponsors and thank them. We've got Cincinnati State as a diamond sponsor. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Cadre. My name is Chris. Ooh, echo. Cadre, Checkpoint, and Okta for gold. We've got bronze is 8451, ComSpark, CDO, CyberRabbit, Dell, Exagrid, Extreme Networks, Franklin University, Gigamon, Nexagen, Sinclair, and Smart Data. Again, those are our bronze. And also our annual partners, ATC, Affidence, CareSource, Cincinnati Bell, Google, Round Tower, University of Dayton, Wright State University, and Uptime. So we definitely couldn't do this without their support. So thank you very much. I'd like to get started by introducing Mark Abel. He's a principal cybersecurity consultant for Wakefield Cybersecurity in Bellbrook, as well as the president of Ohio Metadata Conservation, LLC. Mark's specialization is communication privacy, with particular attention to metadata privacy in the presence of strong adversaries, especially opponents with unlimited funding, computing power, network access, and legal authority. Mark is a perennial target of state-sponsored surveillance and a life member of the Caltech Alumni Association. So please join me in welcoming Mark as he discusses why cybersecurity is not an arms race. Turn it over to you, Mark.
Thank you. And Chris, thank you so much for stepping up for this cybersecurity SIG. It's been a dream long coming, and I'm thrilled that it's coming. I'm also so thrilled to be part of our group today. For anyone listening, thank you so much. If I don't thank you personally, I'm thanking you now, and consider it personal. This winter will make it 40 years that I've been writing code. It doesn't seem that long, really. I've enjoyed witnessing trends in computing over this time, as well as the forces and factors that drive these trends. Unfortunately, a lot of misunderstandings have taken root, both in the technology sector and in the public's understanding. Entire industries, not to mention hundreds of thousands of jobs, now depend on these mistakes being perpetuated. For example, let's look at the narrative of popular culture cybersecurity. Here's the story. It's a jungle out there, and there are all kinds of bad actors online. Some of these cyber criminals are youthful hobbyists. Others are activists, engaging in disruption of or revenge for perceived wrongs. Others are criminal gangs who launch attacks from bureaucratic, technological, or financial safe harbors. There are reports of state-sponsored hackers who target rival nations, especially countries with ideology that differs strongly from that of the sponsoring state. And as the story goes, these bad actors, along with their botnets, break into stuff and harm their victims. Sometimes the harm is theft of funds. Other times it's the theft of confidential information or disclosure of damaging information. Sometimes it's property destruction, whether physical or intellectual. Often there's an extortion component, usually taking the form of ransomware. And this story has a moral. You have to be careful. But that's not the end of the story. It's just the end of the first chapter. And the public, our IT professionals, our executives, our admirals and generals, and our newscasters have been manipulated into a panic. And in their fright, they either forget to check facts as they continue to listen, or they don't have the technical background to understand their environment. Now, I said that hundreds of thousands of jobs are dependent on the public's misunderstanding of computing. In Chapter 2 of the narrative, we hear that cybersecurity conflicts are won by the side with the best technology. We prevent and deter attacks by trying to have more technology and more recent technology than our adversaries. We can achieve this through application of industry best practices like automated software updates, cyber vaults, network monitoring, malware scanning, biometric credentials, rapid instant response teams, and standardization. These measures sound prudent today, but only because they're the only ones we hear of. All of these best practices are terms of a contract none of us should be willing to sign. A contract where we covenant to run vulnerable systems forever. What would happen if we started using networks, computers, and software that are naturally immune to cyber attacks? Jobs would go away, wouldn't they? No one would have to upgrade as a result of scare tactics. Many people wouldn't have to upgrade at all for a long time. Think about the world's dominant web browser, Google Chrome. As of yesterday, 1,992 vulnerabilities for Chrome have been discovered, cataloged, and eventually published by NIST. Do you think it's an accident that, on average, 3 new vulnerabilities per week have surfaced for Google Chrome since its introduction 12 years ago? I'll withdraw the question. Notwithstanding my criticisms, cybercrime losses are real losses and we should be doing something about them. But before we go and do exactly what we're told to do, we need to step back and think more independently about the problem. And the remedies we're wanting are going to depend on our concept of information security as a whole. A widely cited standard here is ISO 27000, which defines information security as preservation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. And since I don't have slides, I'll say it again. Information security means the preservation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information, according to ISO 27000. Now, the only thing I can say in support of this definition is it sounds good and was approved by a committee. But the objectives in this definition don't even apply consistently. Wikipedia articles, for example, aren't confidential. Email systems don't need and frequently don't have continuous availability. If any hop along a message's path, I'm going to stop there. Yet all 3 systems do reasonably need information security. We just need to know what security means in each situation. Here's the definition I use for my practice. Cybersecurity is the discipline of scaling automation responsibly. We start from the perspective of a process that needs automation to be practical or economical, and then we add automation in a manner that tries not to involve negative repercussions. A key point that I make when I talk is that to increase security, you need to reduce complexity, and you continue to reduce complexity until either your objective is no longer reachable, or you've reached an adequate level of security. But the complexity reductions necessary are drastic, and some of our vendors are not going to cooperate. It takes a lot of courage to get rid of our vendors and replace products we already use. How many of us feel ready to replace our accounting system in the middle of the year? How many of us even have time to research alternative accounting systems? As a thought experiment, I brought an accounting system with me today. This is a soroban. It's Japan's version of the Roman abacus. If you can't see me, it's a rectangular frame about the size of a large ruler holding 27 plastic rods, a little thicker than toothpicks. On each rod are 5 beads, about the size of blueberries, with a divider running through each rod, so that 4 beads are on one side and the 5th bead is on the opposite side. The 4 beads count as 1, 10, 100, and so on, depending on the rod, and the remaining beads 5, 50, 500, and so on. This soroban has 135 beads in total. A skilled user can add and subtract 27-digit numbers, as well as multiply, divide, and extract roots from smaller numbers. It's amazingly fast in the right hands, and although it looks tedious to learn, it's a lot easier to master than computer programming. It's easy to inspect and see that it hasn't been tampered with, and importantly, this soroban can't be hacked into from Russia. To first order computations I do on this soroban in this room when I turn off the camera and bury it in a can somewhere are going to be safe. Now, I don't expect you to move all of your calculations to a soroban as a practical solution to real-life cybersecurity concerns. But there's a point here. A soroban used in a private location is entirely under human control. By resigning from the arms race with North Korea, you've essentially won that race permanently. Our job is to emerge carefully from being soroban users in bathroom stalls to computer and network users in locations that better suit us. But we have to keep that soroban promise in our hearts. We're not going to let our automation escape our control. How to emerge from your closets and Faraday cages to work safely in the real world will depend on your style and priorities. And the software we select is going to be very important for 2 reasons. First of all, the less software we have, the easier our secure control of that software is going to be. Second, we need to be mindful of the terms that accompany a software license. Is a vendor interfering with our freedoms of choice, continued availability, informedness, or right to modify and repair our software? If so, we need to dispense with that vendor. Sorry, guys. Even if that means we'll ultimately write some of our code in-house. Unfortunately, with respect to software, we have become a civilization of cyber gluttons in an age of free downloads and supersized solutions. And the problem with us is that we haven't learned to keep our computing truly under human control. There's so much software on our machines that the works get gummed up. The cooling fans spin faster and faster, but the machines seem to work slower and slower. It's one thing if we want to be, for example, movie gluttons. We can buy terabytes of movies if we want. We can store them on whatever media we like, and they'll probably be there when we want to watch them. Movies are inert, and we do a fairly good job keeping them under human control. Software is different from movies. Anyone here can easily manage a terabyte collection of random movies. It doesn't matter what they're about, or who the directors were. All you need is a few dozen Blu-rays. The same is not true of software. It's unlikely that any of us in this breakout session, and I saw a lot of talent when I looked at the list here, or all of us working together can reliably audit even 1 megabyte of machine code by an unknown writer. For one thing, you need to know more than what the code says. You need to know some quirks of the machine it runs on that probably aren't documented. And since it takes 1 million megabytes to make a terabyte, we quickly see that a diverse collection of software is more than 1 million times harder to manage than a collection of the most exotic films. The good news is software used to manage human enterprises generally doesn't need to be as complex as we make it. A company may have exabytes of data, and I think a few of the companies here do, but the number of essential operations on this data is astonishingly small. Most of what we do with our data can be written as closed-form expressions that use a handful of operations. but software marketers do everything in their power to distract us from the simplicity of our requirements. It's much easier to distinguish a product in the marketplace by its large size, sophistication, and perceived flexibility than by its efficiency, transparency, and reliability. It's much easier to sell updates to an insecure product that is already in use than to persuade a user to migrate to a competing product that won't require any updates. It's a lot easier to monetize a product through restrictive licenses and opacity than through permissive licenses and transparency. It's much easier to bring to the market a new update to a system than to bring to the market a system that hasn't required an update since its introduction. It's much easier to tailor products for countries where secure computing is unlawful than to push back against expectations by shareholders of eternal economic growth. It's much easier to find suppliers who bake their own self-interest into every product they design than to find suppliers who prioritize their customers' needs in every technical decision. So with all these factors and pressures considered, don't blame our suppliers too much. Just get rid of them where you need to. It would seem there's little chance of finding dependable help. What can we do when we're tasked with defending information assets from attack? The first thing our defenders need to do is grow up. Cybersecurity battles are governed and decided by rules that the defenders write. The attacking side has no say whatsoever in what assets the defenders have, how these assets are connected online, the hardware the defenders use, the software the defenders use, the people on the defenders' payroll, the simplicity or complexity of the defending infrastructure, the presence or absence of backups, or any other factor that could influence the prospects of a successful breach. Every last detail, we don't want to admit this, of a skirmish is decided by the defender, whether through thoughtful consideration or by outright neglect. To first order, every cybersecurity failure is an accountability failure on the defender's part. When you hear someone blame a rogue employee or a foreign government or a criminal gang or a vendor for a cybersecurity breach, I hope you remember that Mark Abel told you that the whole loss was the victim's fault. You may be angry with me for saying that, but I'm not saying it out of malice. I'm saying this because we defenders have the upper hand in cyberspace, and we need to press our advantage. To win in cyberspace, defenders need to be a lot more alert in the roles we delegate to others, especially blame, which we must never, under any circumstances, delegate to someone else. Here's my favorite cybersecurity book today. I bet everyone here at least knows someone who's read it. It's Extreme Ownership: How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. This is not a technology book. You're not going to learn about network configuration or malware scanning. And the reason it's a good text for us now is that information security has everything to do with accountability and nothing whatsoever, I say this as a Caltech graduate, nothing whatsoever to do with technology. And here again, people are going to disagree. They'll say the reasons we have these problems at all is because computer technology is so new. But I don't see it that way. It's actually not new. Sunday, 3 days ago, marked the 49th year since the introduction of the first microprocessor, the Intel 4004. So we humans have had plenty of time to understand microprocessor design and application. We can design CPUs that rival this Sorbonne with respect to dependability and security. And we can do the same with operating systems, and we can do it again with application software. When we scale automation responsibly, We do so by ensuring a very high ratio of human attention to the complexity of the system we are building. An important question in computer security is going to be, how much code can one person realistically understand and be able to audit? Let's assume we get to hand select all the code we're going to run. We should. And we'll never have to execute something we don't understand. Let's also assume we can hand pick our auditors and only use the brightest 1% of the talent pool. How much code can this team take on? It turns out that humans can't understand much code at all unless we stick to some very rigid forms. When I took computer algorithms from Manny Chandy, there were about 15 or 20 students in the room, some undergrads, some grad students. Manny would put short snippets of code on the projector, typically 7 to 10 lines, and we would spend most of the class together trying to understand first what all that code did, and second, whether the implementation was correct or not. Now picture this room I was in, full of computer scientists who would soon graduate from Caltech, nearly stumped, looking at less than a dozen lines of perfectly legible source code. And Manny, being an MIT graduate, had an interesting kick at the time. He made his students learn how to write software that was a proof of its own correctness. If it's hard for gifted programmers to understand 10 lines of a distributed computing algorithm, then a definitive audit of a large distributed computing application like Mozilla Firefox is out of the question. The source code for yesterday's Firefox 83 contains 282,507 files. Not lines, 282,507 files, and that's without including dependencies on other packages, which Mozilla doesn't even control. So, let's consider a different approach to making software safe in the presence of attackers. We have very fast computers with lots of memory, so why don't we use that computing power to examine the code we're going to run to see if it does malicious things or has remotely exploitable defects? In other words, let's have an automated look at how our code is written as a way to filter out problems before they happen. This approach is called static program analysis, and one of the security industry's dirty secrets is that static program analysis doesn't work today and never will. You might ask how I can say this. What gives me the nerve to tell you that every virus scanner is broken and can't be fixed, and that no computer will ever be built that can look at a segment of code and say every time whether that code is safe or unsafe? The reason is that an American named Henry Gordon Rice proved it in his doctoral dissertation. Is this news to you, that it's mathematically proven that you can't build a malware scanner that works 100% of the time? It gets even more interesting when we think about how long we've known about the problem. Rice submitted his doctoral dissertation in 1951, 3 years before Morris Tannenbaum made the first silicon transistor. Now, one of the disturbing aspects of Rice's theorem can be found in what it doesn't say. It doesn't say a program has to be large before its behavior is computationally undecidable. We can write 12-line programs that no human can predict the outcome of. And worse, we can easily design 12-line programs where we know what they will do, but no one else can learn by reading our source code. People who sell virus scanning software will tell you I have it wrong. They might try to pass me off as an academic, I guess I am, who can't recognize when a system is good enough to sell. They'll tell you that all you really need to do is stay a step ahead of your adversaries. They'll say that, they know how to build programs that recognize millions of different flavors of malware. So if they keep updating those programs, you'll keep buying them again every month. The problem is that malware scanners are too brittle. If you play Russian roulette with one bullet and 999 empty chambers, your odds sound good in the first round, but you'll be dead very soon. And if all your friends play this evening, one will be gone by morning. So malware scanners, here's the thing. Once our retirement plan has been drained and wired to Barbados, our pension is gone. Once the generator's burned out at the hospital, the life support equipment eventually stops working. We can't play the same game again and again where we hope our adversaries don't have a so-called zero-day vulnerability. That is a way to break our systems before any fix is available. And even if an automatic update was available in time, for each of the 17,233 vulnerabilities that NIST published so far this year, maybe not every chemical plant's network connection has the 99.99% uptime needed to install the fixes as they become available. Remember, too, that network connectivity is not an all-or-nothing game. The network connection to your supplier of the malware profiles to allow your scans to work could be down, while your network connection to North Korea is just fine. I need you to understand that the old fable about Windows XP is a myth. Hardware and software don't weaken in security as they get older. The only way they can become defective is to be born defective. We need to stop installing systems that are contingent on any kind of update or monitoring in order to continue reliable operation. Our software and hardware need to be as predictable in their behavior as this Soroban is, and we can do it, provided that we accept responsibility for the entirety of our infrastructure. Remember that everything about our system is ours to architect, and that the only tool in a remote adversary's arsenal is a network cable that looks like this one. In a correctly designed system, there would be no cause for concern about what an attacker may do on his end of the cable. We defenders need to quit wrapping this cable around our own necks on behalf of the other side. One place where defenders need to take a much firmer stance is hardware complexity. Our computing architectures are designed solely for speed, with security treated later as if it's some kind of bolt-on peripheral. A recent example was just announced yesterday. It's Microsoft's new Pluton security processor, which Intel, AMD, and Qualcomm have already said they're going to support. But I'm sticking with my original advice. To increase security, you need to reduce complexity. And Pluton, like all its predecessors, is going to do little more than lock users out of their own machines. Memo to Microsoft. It's our adversaries that we need to exclude. Humans are already good at limiting physical access to sensitive resources. We move them to secure locations and watch over them as we have done for millennia. The priority with silicon today should be avoiding remote exploits instead of worrying about tamper-proofing Blu-ray players. Microsoft's motivation, I suggest, for introducing Pluton has nothing to do with security and everything to do with copy protection, as well as selling the next generation of defective silicon. So what's wrong with our hardware that it becomes something that hackers can take over and use against us? Several things. First, it's too complex. A lot of programmers, new programmers, are told a story that computers do exactly what we tell them to. And that's the problem with programming, because we make mistakes and computers follow them. It's actually worse than that. Sometimes computers make up their own mistakes because they're too complex, and hackers know how to take advantage of those mistakes. Second, computer manufacturers have difficulty giving up control of the machines they build. Theoretically, when I buy a machine and bring it to my lab, I'm now in complete control of that machine. But it's common now for manufacturers to try and retain a degree of control even after the sale. Third, the way we've designed our computers for at least the past 50 years has in some ways been antagonistic to the process of writing good software. And this is especially true when it comes to immunity from hacking. We still build computers that blatantly obstruct our efforts to write good software, just because we've always built them like this. Fourth, as users, we have very few places to turn if we want better hardware. For most uses, we basically have a choice between x86 and ARM, with a handful of brands in each of the two camps. That's not enough choice. Let's look briefly at how the hardware we use contributes to security problems. What I think of as hacking is basically the art of willfully producing unexpected outcomes. That is, focusing on the irregular behaviors that a machine may have that can be used as exploitable defects. For hardware, I can offer 3 reasons why these behaviors happen. The first reason, which I call category 1, is that the weird behavior is on purpose. It's when a machine is designed to work in a particular way. But when we go to write code, sometimes we don't pay attention to the details. An example is adding 2 numbers. Most hardware now can add numbers so large that we don't worry much about the possibility that the numbers will be too big to produce a correct result. And this can lead to security weaknesses. A second category of hardware irregularities is that can cause security nightmares are the ones that are completely unexpected. They aren't intentionally there, but can result from design complexity from trying to make a computer run as fast as possible. But sometimes hackers can exploit these irregularities. The usual workaround for category 2 is to make changes to the firmware and operating system. The problem with this stopgap is it forces systems to operate contrary to the way they were designed, possibly creating new problems. If you're really old, if you've seen the film 2001: A Space Odyssey or read the book, it's a little like Hal's Meltdown, where a late change in plans causes the computer to murder 4 scientists. A big problem with category 2 surprises is that they reach way back in time. When the Spectre family of vulnerabilities was announced in 2018, most of the computers running on Earth were affected. Cat 2 problems also reach way forward in time because real solutions will require extensive work, better validation, and a big landfill. And then there's what I call category 3. Up to now, people who worry that computers themselves might actually be evil have tended to be conspiracy theorists and security researchers. That's changing, and the problem is now being considered very seriously in critical infrastructure sectors, mostly military and government. I suggest that the solution to all 3 of these hardware vulnerability classes is to allow buyers more influence over the hardware supply chain. The degree of influence is going to depend on the particular user and type of application, but can extend to how the hardware is specified, designed, validated, and manufactured. All 4 of these purchasing domains involve increasing security by reducing complexity, while simultaneously increasing transparency and accountability. My work at Wakefield Cybersecurity is the design of open source architectures for dependable computing hardware. In a talk called Building Secure CPUs in Your Kitchen, I discuss the feasibility, potential applications, and current status of mini computers that can be built using fungible components, where the behavior of these machines is controlled not by purchased semiconductors, but by firmware and circuit boards that can be known to, authorized by, and if necessary, manufactured by the users themselves. It's disheartening to dream of writing secure software, well-organized, succinct, thoroughly validated operating systems and applications, knowing it would have to run on silicon with irreparable, undisclosed, and often deliberately introduced vulnerabilities. This is why my work proposes a supply chain firewall for CPUs and systems that can shield, to a large extent, their purchaser or end user from the mistakes, misdeeds, and misaligned interests of semiconductor manufacturers. A semiconductor plant costs 1,000 times as much, at least, as a pick-and-place assembly line. But either can build a CPU. CPUs made in a Semiconductor foundry are cheap in large runs, tiny, and perform computations at great speed. In contrast, CPUs soldered from small ICs allow superior process oversight during design and assembly. Ability to inspect finished CPUs that does not exist with single chip processors. Affordability in even one-off lots, and more options with respect to assembly plant ownership and siting. Stay tuned for some further announcements on that. In closing, cybersecurity is popularly regarded as an arms race where the wit and intellect of the bad guys are pitted against the watchfulness and teamwork of the good guys. Battles are decided supposedly in favor of the side that is quickest to adapt. Skirmishes between American interests and forces of instability never stop. It's not a coincidence that the 4 countries most known for cyber attacks against the United States are the same 4 that are most known for human rights abuses against their own people. I think that US treatment of these regimes as plausible opponents in cyberspace tends to legitimize claims of sovereignty with respect to their crimes at home. So I don't think we should treat them as plausible opponents at all. A permanent American victory in cyberspace is a better strategy than allowing today's arms race to continue according to rules written by China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. The knowledge exists to win right now. The knowledge exists, but the information security industry doesn't like the idea. Neither does the rest of the computing industry, for that matter. The status quo guarantees a permanent stream of new sales to keep up with the bad guys. Are we ready to let those sales lag in exchange for actual security in a stronger global economy? Thank you so much for coming out today for Technology First's 2020 Taste of IT conference. We may have some questions.
Okay, looking at the questions, and so far I don't have any. So we'll go ahead and ask for another round. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A.
I have one from email I can start with if you'd like.
Certainly.
I was asked, when you say that computers are first designed for speed and only tack on security later, are the simpler / more secure systems likely to run with a competitive speed? I would say that would be architecture dependent. In the Dog 36 architecture that I'm developing at Wakefield, the system is going to run at about 1% of the speed of a modern VLSI core. But many CPUs aren't used anywhere near 1% of their capacity. So for applications like process control, audio, or text-based communication, the architecture I'm designing will be competitive for the application it's running on. But tasks such as transcoding video would be too processor intensive and would need to find a different solution in order to make their hardware secure. Any more questions from the field?
No.
I have more email if you'd like.
Why don't we do one more, and then we'll have to close out so we can make sure that we stay on track.
Sure. How did Henry Gordon Rice know about the malware scanner thing before the first silicon transistor was made? Dr. Rice lived to see Windows XP, but his theorem predated the microprocessor by 20 years and malware scanners by 36 years. What Rice actually proved is that non-trivial semantic properties of programs are undecidable. And it turns out that maliciousness and benignness of software are non-trivial semantic properties. So we take this theorem, if you will, and we lay it over today's application, and we see that we've got a big problem. So thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Caitlin.
Certainly. Well, Mark, I have to say that was a fantastic session. I definitely learned quite a bit, so very much appreciated.
You're most kind. Thank you.
I'd also like to give a special thanks over to University of Dayton for being a featured sponsor for this session. Please remember to complete the survey for each session by finding the link in the My Agenda session descriptions, the same place that you used, you clicked to join this session. And by participating in the survey, you'll ensure that your voice is heard and help shape the future of technology-first events. So please take the time to fill out the survey. And now we're going to have a 30-minute break. We're going to use this time to grab a snack, visit the exhibitors, explore the event platform, and the game codes that you can use by exploring the app. So the game code for this session is the word race. Again, the game code, excuse me, for this session is the word race. So thank you very much. Mark, thanks a lot. Have
My
a good
privilege.
day.
Thanks.